3 weeks after the supermarkets went dark and the pharmacies ran dry, the entire town of Griswold, Kansas stood in Catherine Morse's driveway, silent except for the crunch of gravel under their boots and the sound of grown men trying not to beg. She recognized every face through the screen door. The postal clerk who'd made jokes about her doomsday shopping trips. The bank teller who'd rolled her eyes every time Catherine withdrew cash to buy bulk rice. The neighbor who'd called the county inspector claiming her basement renovations were unsafe and probably illegal. Now they stood there in the October cold, hollow-eyed and thin, waiting to see if the woman they'd mocked for 2 years would let them starve. But that moment didn't begin at her doorstep. It began 18 months earlier, on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, when Catherine walked into Morrison's Feed and Supply, carrying a printed spreadsheet that would change everything. At 53, Catherine Morse lived in the same farmhouse her grandparents had built in 1947, a square 2-story structure at the end of Barton Road, with a basement nobody had used for anything except storage since the 1980s. She worked as a county records clerk, kept to herself, and spent her evenings reading logistics reports and agricultural forecasts the way most people watch television. Which was exactly why people thought she'd lost her mind when she started buying food in quantities that didn't make sense for a woman who lived alone. It started quietly. Extra cans during weekly grocery runs. An extra bag of flour. Dried beans purchased in 5-pound bags instead of 1. But by early spring, her purchases had escalated into something the town couldn't ignore, especially after she ordered a commercial-grade chest freezer delivered to her house on a flatbed truck. "You opening a restaurant, Catherine?" the delivery driver asked, laughing. She signed the paperwork without answering. Then came the day she walked into Morrison's and handed Dale Morrison a list that made him go pale. 200 pounds of rice, 50 pounds of sugar, industrial quantities of canned vegetables, cooking oil, salt, powdered milk, and oats. Dale stared at the paper, then at Catherine, then back at the paper. This is 4 months of inventory. I can't just, I'll pay cash, Catherine said. Order it. I'll wait. The story spread through Griswold like fire through dry grass. By that weekend, half the town knew Catherine Morse was stockpiling food like civilization was ending. The other half heard by Monday. At the post office, Linda Greer laughed openly. She's one of those survivalists now. Probably thinks the government's coming for her beans. At the bank, Marcy Hilton shook her head while processing Catherine's cash withdrawal. It's sad, really. All that money wasted on paranoia. At the diner, where farmers gathered every morning, Tom Rigby stirred his coffee and said what most were thinking. Woman's got nobody to cook for, and she's buying food by the pallet. That's not preparation. That's mental illness. But Catherine didn't stop. She hired contractors to reinforce her basement walls, install industrial shelving, and upgrade the ventilation system. She bought a backup generator and 300 gallons of diesel stored in code-approved tanks behind her bar. She installed a hand pump well beside the old electric one. And when her neighbor, Joel Pritchard, saw the construction crews and reported her to the county inspector for suspicious modifications, Catherine calmly presented every permit, every approval, every building code certification. The inspector found nothing wrong. Joel found new reasons to complain at the gas station instead. By summer, Catherine's basement had transformed into something nobody in Griswold had ever seen outside of documentary footage. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, stocked with rotating inventory labeled and dated with meticulous precision. Canned goods, organized by type and expiration. Dried goods in airtight containers. A separate, climate-controlled section for medications, first aid supplies, and batteries. A small chest freezer stocked with frozen vegetables and vacuum-sealed meat. Water barrels, tools, fuel. Everything organized, everything tracked, everything planned for a scenario Catherine saw coming that nobody else would acknowledge. Because Catherine hadn't lost her mind. She'd simply been paying attention. She'd watched shipping delays grow longer. Seen grocery stores struggle to restock shelves after regional disruptions. Read reports about onco congestion, labor shortages, and the thinning margins that kept modern supply chains functioning. And she'd understood something most people refused to consider. The system only worked until it didn't. Her sister visited in August and stood in the basement doorway, speechless. "Catherine," she said finally, "this is insane. You spent your entire savings on this." "I've spent it on insurance," Catherine replied, adjusting a row of canned tomatoes. Against what? Catherine met her sister's eyes. Against being helpless when everyone else realizes they should have done the same. Her sister left shaking her head. And across Griswold, people kept laughing, kept joking, kept living as if the trucks would always arrive on time, and the shelves would always refill, and the world would continue operating with the same predictable reliability it always had. Until the morning, everything stopped. The collapse didn't announce itself with sirens or speeches. It arrived quietly, in the form of empty delivery trucks and apologetic managers explaining that regional distribution centers had temporary delays. But the delays stretched from days into weeks, and the grocery stores that once restocked overnight began rationing what little remained. At first, people treated it like an inconvenience, a supply hiccup, something that would resolve itself the way disruptions always did. But when the pharmacies ran low on insulin and the gas stations started limiting fuel purchases, and the feed store couldn't restock animal supplies, Griswold began to understand what Catherine had seen coming. By the third week, panic replaced inconvenience. Families who'd never missed a meal fought over the last packages of pasta at Morrison's. The bank closed its lobby after customers grew aggressive demanding cash withdrawals the ATMs couldn't fulfill. The hospital 30 miles away stopped accepting non-emergency patients because they couldn't guarantee supplies. And through it all, Catherine Morse remained invisible. She stopped going to town entirely. Her truck stayed parked. Her lights stayed dim. She lived quietly inside the home everyone had mocked, using the supplies everyone had laughed at, while the rest of Griswold slowly came apart. The postal clerk, Linda Greer, ran out of food on day 16. She'd always shopped day to day, buying what she needed when she needed it, trusting the system the way everyone did. When the shelves emptied, she had 3 cans of soup and half a box of crackers. The bank teller, Marcy Hilton, spent her savings trying to buy food from families willing to sell. A box of pasta for $40. A bag of rice for $75. By week 3, nobody was selling anymore. Tom Rigby, the farmer who'd called Catherine mentally ill, watched his diesel reserves dwindle and realized he couldn't harvest his fields without fuel. His crops sat rotting while his family ate through their freezer supplies, then their pantry, then nothing. And Joel Pritchard, the neighbor who'd reported Catherine to the inspector, knocked on doors across town begging for help nobody could give because everyone was in the same position he was, unprepared, undersupplied, and running out of time. It was Joel who finally organized the group that showed up at Catherine's door. Not out of leadership, but desperation. Because someone remembered that Catherine had prepared for exactly this. Someone else remembered the pallets of food, the generator, the stockpile everyone had mocked. And slowly, carefully, the idea formed that maybe the woman they dismissed wasn't crazy after all. Maybe she'd been right. And maybe, if they asked, she would help. Catherine saw them coming long before they reached her porch. 23 people walking up Barton Road in the late October cold, moving slowly, like they weren't sure they should be there. She recognized every face. Linda from the post office, Marcy from the bank, Tom Rigby and his wife, Joel Pritchard looking smaller than she'd ever seen him. She stood behind the screen door and waited. Joel spoke first, his voice rough. "Catherine, we need to talk." She didn't respond. Tom stepped forward. "We know what we said. About you. About the stockpiling." He struggled with the words. "We were wrong. You were cruel," Catherine corrected quietly. Linda's voice cracked. "We were. You're right. But Catherine, people are hungry. Kids are hungry. The stores are empty. The county says relief supplies won't reach us for weeks, maybe longer." Catherine looked past them, at the town beyond. At the dark storefronts and the empty roads and the quiet desperation settling over Griswold like snow. "You reported me to the county, Joel," she said. "You told them I was building something dangerous." Joel flinched. "I know. I was jealous. And stupid. You called me mentally ill, Tom. At the diner. Loud enough for everyone to hear." Tom's face reddened. "I did. And I'm ashamed." Catherine's hands tightened on the doorframe. Every memory, every joke, every dismissive comment played through her mind. The wasted breath trying to warn people. The isolation that came from being right when everyone wanted you to be wrong. "Why should I help any of you?" she asked. The question hummed in the cold air. Nobody answered at first. Then Linda spoke, barely above a whisper. "Because you're better than we are." Catherine stared at her. Linda's eyes were red, her cheeks hollow. Behind her, families stood waiting. People who'd been her neighbors for decades. Flawed, short-sighted, cruel sometimes, but human, suffering. She thought of her grandmother, who'd survived the Dust Bowl by sharing what little she had, who'd taught Catherine that preparation wasn't about hoarding, but responsibility. Catherine opened the door. "Come inside," she said. "We need to talk about rationing." Catherine's basement became the heart of Griswold's survival, but not in the way anyone expected. Because she didn't simply open her stockpile and let people take what they wanted. She organized it with the same methodical precision she'd used to build it, transforming desperation into structure and ensuring her 2 years of supplies could stretch across the entire town for as long as necessary. The first night, she gathered everyone in her living room and laid out the rules. Each family would receive carefully calculated rations based on size and need. In exchange, they would contribute labor, maintaining the distribution system, repairing infrastructure, sharing skills. Those with medical training would organize health services. Those with mechanical skills would keep generators running. Everyone would work, and everyone would eat. "This isn't charity," Catherine said firmly. "This is community survival. And it only works if everyone participates." Tom Rigby, the farmer, stepped forward. "I've got fields full of rotting crops because I can't harvest without diesel." "You have diesel." Catherine nodded. "You harvest those fields, we'll have food production. Real food, not just my stockpile. That's how we extend what we have." By the end of the first week, Griswold had transformed from a collection of panicked individuals into something resembling a functioning unit. Catherine's basement became the distribution center, opened 3 times weekly for ration pickup. Tom's farm operation restarted with Catherine's fuel, bringing in potatoes, winter squash, and root vegetables that would store through spring. Marcy Hilton, the bank teller, used her organizational skills to track inventory and rations with the same precision Catherine demanded. Linda Greer coordinated communication, checking on elderly residents and families with young children, making sure nobody slipped through the cracks. Even Joel Pritchard found his place, using his carpentry skills to build root cellars and storage systems in other homes, teaching families how to preserve what little they had. But the work wasn't easy. Tempers flared when rations felt too small. Arguments erupted over who deserved more. Twice, Catherine had to enforce consequences when families tried to hoard extra supplies. She never wavered. The rules existed for everyone's survival, including theirs. "You think I'm being cruel," she told one angry father who demanded extra food for his teenage sons. "I'm being fair. Everyone gets what they need to survive, not what they want. Need." The man left furious. He came back 3 days later and apologized, because by then he'd seen the math, seen how many people depended on the system holding together, seen what would happen if Catherine let emotions override logistics. By mid-November, the county finally delivered relief supplies, but far less than promised and inconsistently distributed. Most of Griswold's neighboring towns were struggling worse, their populations scattered or relocated to regional shelters. Griswold stayed intact because Catherine's preparation had bought them time to organize, adapt, and survive the worst weeks. When a county coordinator visited to assess the situation, she stood in Catherine's basement staring at the half-empty shelves and meticulous ration logs with something close to awe. "You saved this town," the coordinator said quietly. "I gave them a chance," Catherine corrected. "They saved themselves by working together." By spring, supply chains had partially recovered. Stores restocked sporadically. Fuel deliveries resumed. Life didn't return to normal. Normal was gone, but it stabilized into something livable. And Griswold had changed in ways nobody could ignore. Families maintained pantries stocked for months, not days. The town organized a community food bank managed with the same precision Catherine had demonstrated. Tom Rigby's farm expanded into a cooperative model, with multiple families sharing labor and harvest. Skills that had been forgotten, canning, preserving, repairing instead of replacing, became common again. And Catherine, who'd spent 2 years being mocked and dismissed, became someone different in the town's eyes. Not a hero exactly, but something more valuable. Proof that preparation wasn't paranoia, that self-reliance wasn't selfishness, that the person willing to think past comfort into survival might be the difference between a community enduring or collapsing. One evening in early May, Linda Greer knocked on Catherine's door carrying a basket of fresh bread from the first wheat harvest. I wanted to say thank you, Linda said. Really say it. For not letting us starve when you had every right to. Catherine accepted the bread, warm in her hands. I didn't do it for gratitude. I know. Linda hesitated. Why did you do it? Catherine thought of her grandmother, of the Dust Bowl stories, of the lesson she'd carried her whole life. Because someone prepared before me. And someday, someone else will need to prepare after me. That's how communities survive. Not by hoping things work out, but by making sure they can. Linda nodded slowly, understanding settling into her expression. After she left, Catherine walked down to her basement, now mostly empty except for core supplies being carefully rebuilt. The shelves that had once been full stood as quiet testimony to a simple truth Griswold had learned the hard way. The world didn't owe anyone stability, but preparation, discipline, and the willingness to help even those who doubted you could create it anyway. She ran her hand along the wooden shelf her grandfather had built decades ago, smiled faintly, and began updating her inventory logs for next season. Because Catherine Morse understood something the laughter had tried to teach her to ignore. Being ready wasn't about being right. It was about being responsible for the moment when everyone else finally realized they should have been.